get us the update on 5.0. I've read a little bit about it, but didn't get the chance to come to. Oh, I can hear the echo.
Yes, it's good.
But didn't get the chance to come to announcement, and I don't know. Oh, so very good, very good, very good.
Overachiever.
Okay.
We had a
So
great
there you
turnout,
go.
yeah, great.
I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's always fun to be here and get a chance to see all of you and get a chance to talk about this. A quick little bit of history for those of you who might not remember. We began doing this in 2015, really as a way to help us do our funding better. We wanted to make sure with the limited amount of funding, we were able to invest in the places that we know need the most investment. And so that's really how this began. My background is as an epidemiologist.
Yay.
And so data was a familiar thing to me, but I also believe that that data could also help us target our resources better. So little did we know at that time that the maps would become something that many people would use as a way to make decisions, set policy, allocate resources, but also, as a nonprofit director just told me the other day, he said, we consider this document to be actually our #1 economic development tool for Lincoln because we are able to make the case in solid, good data. So we're very, very proud of that. And of course, the Community Health Endowment does this in total collaboration with the Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department. We work together starting months before this and work to make sure we have good data, that we have all the questions we need answered about where the data is coming from, and that we can rely on it. And we also have a couple of other partners that I just want to mention really quickly. Lincoln Public Schools, the Partnership for Healthy Lincoln, help us with the youth fitness data. We get locations of physician practices from the Lancaster County Medical Society. We work with the city's urban development, Kurt Elder up there. He helped us with a number of projects, including healthy food. And we also work with, who am I forgetting? I'm forgetting somebody. The University of Nebraska Department of Extension, who help us with the healthy food. So it's a bigger collaboration than just the two of us, but we've been working together, all of us, I think, on it since 2015, and we're still on good speaking terms.
Is that correct?
Well,
Yeah.
yes. This is public meeting. Yes.
So I'm going to turn it over to Raju, and he's going to give you the start, and then we'll kind of go back and forth, and feel free to jump in with any questions that you might have.
Do you mind if we get the booklet
No.
while the data's going on?
We have two things. You can either take a hard copy or you can do a QR code which will download it for you. So either way.
Danke.
That's
I gave myself 2, if you guys want another one. I've given some away.
QR code. The QR code thing.
You are, right?
Yeah, actually, the presentation is actually an animation of poverty since 1980 to 2022, 2021. So in the 1980, yeah, that's what you're seeing. The animation is like the suburbanization of poverty since 1980 and where the city limit was for every year that we mapped the data for. And sorry. And we are seeing that the poverty has been growing outwards from our urban core area. Okay, but poverty itself is a very complicated measure by all means, right? I mean, there's so many different dependencies like income, prevailing economic conditions in that era, and if we even move back. Right now, by 2021, we are having poverty rate is in Lancaster County is 12%. But if we move back the dial a little bit further into mid-2000s, the poverty rate was 18.5%. So it's like, and these are some of the metrics that we used for measuring poverty rate is like minimum wage back in 1980 to 22, and Poverty level income for per capita income is $4,190 to $14,000. And then the federal minimum wage has not gone up, or if you had remember back in 2008, 2009 was the last time they revised the federal minimum wage from $7 to $7.25. And since then, nothing has moved there. Go ahead. And overall, the poverty rate locally and in comparison with Douglas County and Nebraska has also gone down, is on a steady decline since its peak during the Great Recession of 2007-2009, when we had like 18.5% of our county has poverty rate was 18.5%. Again, it's too many, lot of factors, economic factors. And also, recently we also have seen these pandemics and also natural disasters also affect the poverty rate. For example, New Orleans still did not recover since Katrina for the population that is, that moved out of New Orleans is because of the impacts of natural disasters as well. So, and what we also did is there are different definitions when you are saying an urban core, right? I mean, these highlighted census tracts that you see around the city campus is what we're using for this measure as an urban core and outside urban core. Both in these core versus urban outside core, we are seeing a decline, right? From for example, in the urban core, with 30.3% in 2012 to 25.5% in 2022 or 2021. And comparatively, outside the core, the poverty rate is from 8.6 to 7.7. It's also a steady decline. But the gap between these two, the poverty rate or ratio between core versus urban core, has always been between 3.2 to 3.5 times. It's a multiple factor, right? So the ratio between core versus urban core is 3.5 times. That has always been the case. Okay.
So one of the reasons why this matters is because usually when you see poverty somewhere else, it's never standing by itself. It's always in combination with other things, and I tend to call them weights, other things that are weighing on a neighborhood or weighing on a person. And so the health department is able to use a special algorithm that helps us understand how poverty may impact a person's life expectancy. And life expectancy is basically how long a person is expected to live if they're subjected to the conditions in a certain part of our community. So here in the pink, what you'll see are areas of our community where poverty is 30 to 60%. And then you'll see in the blue poverty that is 0 to 5%. And if they apply that algorithm and look at life expectancy, there remains pretty much that 10-year difference between the core and the core. So we know, and out of the core. So we know that 3 to 3.5 times poverty level does have impact on people. And that causes us to think, at the end of the day, lifting the weight of poverty should be one of our key indicators to a healthier community. Here is where people live in census tracts. And Lincoln is divided into about 77 census tracts. Each one of them have about 6,000 people in each one of them. And so these census tracts in blue are where the poverty level is higher than average in our community. Now, if we look at where people of color live, you'll see some consistencies there. And in fact, this is where those overlap. And so a key factor, and you'll find this in your report, is that if you look in the areas where minority population is greater than average, 70% of those census tracts also have higher than average poverty. If you look in the areas where there's a lower than average minority population, only 13% of them have higher than average poverty. So that tells us that being a person of color in Lincoln and living in poverty does have a connection. Those are linked. And for someone like us, and I think for the health department, when we're looking at what services to offer, when we're looking on how to reach people, issues like language, those things become more and more important because we have to disconnect being a person of color and living in poverty. One of the reasons is because if you look at our population by race in Lancaster County back in 1990, the orange represents the white population and the blue represents people of color. If you move to today, it's about that 80-20% that I just mentioned. But if we look onward to another 30 years, less than 30 years, you're looking at about a 65 and 35. So one of our goals should be to make sure that that blue part of our bar there, the people of color, become less and less associated with poverty, or we'll simply have more poverty in our community. I also want to talk about a couple of things that have to do with other issues in our community. People often ask about primary care, where it's located. You've seen this map, I'm sure, before. Each one of these blue dots represents a primary care location. So this is somewhere a primary care doctor or a pediatrician, which would be considered to be primary care for children. You'll see there's economic forces at work here, a lot of things happening in the southeast and east part of our, or southeast and south part of our community. One of the great things about maps is they also tell you what's going right, and you can see things that are going right. They're in the core where it's yellow. When we began doing this work in 2015, there was only one blue dot there. There are now 4 blue dots there. I think that should be something we should all celebrate in our community. We now have 4 primary health care clinics, all of which are associated with helping individuals who are often at high risk for poor outcomes or who cannot always afford care. Those are all located now in our medically underserved area. You will see, however, there are some areas to the northeast and to the northwest along those corridors where perhaps one of our investments should be is planting primary care in those neighborhoods.
And or the majority of those new, it looks like now the majority of the primary care providers in the medically unserved areas, the 4 that you were just mentioning, they have primary care or
Yeah.
maybe,
Yeah, I would consider them all what I would consider to be medical homes. In other words, they are places where people can go again and again and again and receive the same care from the same providers. We also have the addition of a mobile health clinic through Bluestem. They have, I think they're in the process of staffing it, but when you imagine that is also added to the mix here, I think, and that's another great alternative to some of the places where we don't have static primary care.
Okay, in our county, I mean, you are all aware of this. There has been an increase in multi-unit housing in the last decade, right? I mean, and right now, rental burden. It is considered a rental burden when a family is spending more than 30% of their income on their rent and utilities. And we do have pockets in town where the rental burden is higher, where they're exceeding 30% of their income is on rent, right? And then again, there are multiple factors that affect this one. This one is a shortage of housing. Even last week, for example, in NPR, they were mentioning about a national shortage in housing, even though the interest rate is almost approaching to 8%, but there is no downward trend in home prices, especially first-time home buyer prices, because there is shortage of housing for first-time home buyers. So again, it's a much more complicated issue that involves many different players.
But I love maps like this because I think they help policymakers like you think about where to perhaps plant more of your funds related to homebuyer assistance or rental assistance, because these are the areas that you know are more impacted.
Yeah, right now our affordable housing dollars and even our buyout dollars for rental properties who don't want to provide income-based housing really are not segmented at whatsoever into different sections of the city. And so, you know, that's been, I think, somewhat an issue you and I have talked about in the past, you know, about making sure those dollars are hitting places that they need to actually hit.
And sometimes with maps, you'll discover things that you didn't know about a part of the community, or something that's perhaps more on this. It's not, you don't see it on the surface, it's perhaps something that a map needs to tell us because we can't see it otherwise. So I think they're very helpful in that way. Raju?
Oh, sorry.
I'm,
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
we don't have enough time today, but at some point, I'd like to dig in a little bit more on university students and their impact, how they impact the numbers around rental burden and poverty and healthcare.
Yeah, we see that, especially in Census Tract 19, that is a downtown area, all the new housing are in the downtown region along the Haymarket, the new apartment complexes, and also in Census Tract 5, that's in the North 14th Street along, just north of the university. I don't know the neighborhood name. I think it's North Bottoms, I think is the neighborhood. Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, so.
But
yeah.
Sandra, you make a really good point, because if you look at the red areas, sometimes they are aggregated, and orange is around the campuses where you would find students. Southeast Community College, you're gonna see that. But I also think it's compelling to see areas where perhaps those students don't live that light up.
Yeah.
And that, in finding out how to differentiate those two, I think would be worth the time.
Yeah. I don't want to disregard where poverty is happening, but it hit me a little bit about the healthcare, because I thought there are pockets of students who live off campus who have access to healthcare, and we don't put a dot at the healthcare center, the University Healthcare Center. So I'm just like, oh, how do we start to tease that apart?
Yeah. And we didn't put a dot there because we didn't feel like it was accessible to the community.
It's not.
And we take the university campus, that census tract is not included in any of this data. So if you live on campus, or if you have an address that's not Lincoln, you're not included in this data.
In poverty also, with respect to this, for example, Census Tract 4, which is Clinton, Malone, and some part of Hartley neighborhood, it's comparatively it's younger population because of the university housing, and a lot of university students rent the properties around the campus, and also it's very diverse neighborhood. More than 40% of the Clinton, Malone, and some part of Hartley neighborhoods are non-white, non-Hispanic population. So, sorry. This is a new addition that we started adding to the Place Matters from now on. This is Social Vulnerability Index. Anytime when we are having a natural disaster or calamities like pandemics and all, it's very difficult to measure, or the impact of burden on certain population is higher than others. So these are the 15 factors the CDC has started measuring. That those factors, those 15 are on your right side. They are grouped into 4 different groupings together, and then you get an overall index when we weight the data based on all the census tracts and everything. So Lancaster County is about, with respect to all the counties in US, I think we have close to 3,000 or a little over 5,000, between 3,000 and 4,000 counties in the US. Lancaster County is ranked at 0.37. The index is 0 to 1. So we are at 0 to 1 is the index. So 0.37, we are at low to moderate level of vulnerability with respect to all counties in US. With respect to the counties in Nebraska, we are at 0.77. So we are at a higher rate of vulnerable than rest of the state. And then when we measure the data again, going sub-county level into census tracts, the darker the color you see, they are more vulnerable than the lighter colors. We divided all the census tract based on weighting into 4 different quartiles. And then the usefulness of these kinds of vulnerability maps is we can overlay this with, say, for example, our 500 floodplain. And you see our 500 floodplain actually follows through our dark areas along the Antelope Creek floodway. And we did have 3 500-year floods in the last 15 years that we had flooding in South Bottoms neighborhood a lot. So
I like this kind of map. If, for God forbid, there would be another pandemic, for example, you can begin to think where to go in first with information, where to go in to make sure that people are able to, are less able to financially sustain another pandemic situation. It just helps understand where, as I mentioned earlier, the weights are the heaviest on certain neighborhoods.
Okay. This is also a new addition to the prenatal care measure that we measure. In the past, we used to measure first trimester care or 10 or more prenatal care visits as a measure of good prenatal care during pregnancy. So in the health department, we have been measuring this adequate care, adequate plus care for about 10 years now. We wanted to move ahead and push it into the community more and more now. What it means is the definition of adequate care means a pregnant mother should initiate her care before the 5th month and then achieve 80% of the required visits during the term of the pregnancy. So that's how it's measured. And currently in our county, we have 75.6% is the adequate care requirements that we are meeting. Our goal is to achieve at least 80.5%. That is a national goal set by CDC. Again, this indicator is impacted by access to care, health insurance, affordability of care, and things like that. And again, there is a stark difference between mothers who had Medicaid versus private insurance. In Medicaid mothers, the adequate care rate is 70.1%, I think. Sorry, 70.1%, and in private insurance, it is 81.7%. So there is again a stark difference there. So.
And this is a great example of how CHE, for example, if we're going to fund, which we are, funding prenatal care, we would say, where do we need to go first? And so we would say we want to see how to address the needs of women in those yellow and red areas, and that way we can target programs and services much more efficiently. And in fact, we know that if we look at race and ethnicity, we can take it down even further, all the way to every major race, down to American Indian, where we see only 58.2% of women are getting early and adequate prenatal care. So if we only have a limited amount of funds, going into certain neighborhoods, addressing the needs of minority women would be really where we would want to begin that work. I want to talk about a couple of other quick things. This is our healthy food access map. You've all seen this in the past, and I will tell you this has improved dramatically since our last. We have now some healthy food options running up the core of 27th Street. That used to be all red, right up the core. It's now green. So we have, I think, really worked hard. We've raised the bar in terms of what we expect certain neighborhoods to have. We still struggle with some areas up in the northeast corridor. Trying to work with some of our partners up in that area to do that. And of course, this would be an example, again, of how we would use our funds to be able to target, for example, the Healthy Lincoln Fresh Truck. They use this map to run their routes. And so they're able to say, we don't have to guess where to go, or we don't just say, well, somebody offered us to go over here. We can say, here are the places we need to go. And I think they're up to 200 and some tons of fresh produce that have been distributed from this truck. We've seen some really good things happening. I will tell you, this is one that is probably one of our more biggest wake-up calls for the whole community. Back before COVID, 2018 and 19, the number of kids who passed the PACER test, our goal has been 80% of kids. That kind of weeds out the ones who can't or won't want to do the PACER. And we'll see here that the only ones that were really meeting that goal back in 2018 and 19 were those in the green. So they finished the PACER test earlier this year, and this is our new data. It shows that in the core, there's numbers of areas where less than 50% of kids are passing the PACER test. So this is something that we really need to give attention to as a community. If we expect this generation, this 4th to 8th graders, to live even as long as lives as we do, or to have as much success in life, because here's the data. We know that if you're aerobically fit, you're going to be a better student. It shows that way on reading, writing, math, and science grades across the board. We know there are incredibly important life skills that are happen when you are becoming aerobically fit. There are lower dropout rates, there's higher test scores, kids are more likely to attend college, and they're higher wage earners. this is setting, in many ways, keeping kids aerobically fit is setting them up for success. It's not just about big muscles and being able to do push-ups. This is about real important longevity kinds of work. And so I think it's important for us to really point this out and continue to work on it. We did just finish, along with Lincoln Public Schools, a report called Youth Fitness, Sports, and Opportunity. It hasn't been released yet. I assume it will be here in the next month. But it has 30 some recommendations for what our community can do to respond to getting kids more fit. And I hope that maybe if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to come back and talk to you about it. It's a topic of which there has been an incredible amount of interest. And the Lincoln Public Schools have been a great partner in letting us talk to their sports staff in getting this report done. We also, this is another example of how we are able to use these funds. We can look in that area and see, we know kids in the core need more aerobic fitness. Oftentimes they cannot participate in other programs like club sports and things that other kids can. And so we funded a youth sports program over at the Malone Center, and you'll see that now kids are doing the same kind of programs that are happening in other parts of the community at a lower cost to them. And I always have to show this because I just think this is one of the coolest things. I hope I have it with me. A few months ago, their football team came over to see me because they had won the state championship. And that had never happened before. And they brought me one of their state champion rings.
Nice.
Nice. All real diamonds, of course. And but the reason why this was, I think, so compelling to me is because Tom's heard me tell this story at his town hall meeting. My husband had just come back from his 40th anniversary reunion of the Henderson High School State Football Championship. And all 25 of those guys showed up. They took them out there in the middle of the field. They applauded them and praised them, and all these 58-year-old guys are standing out there, like, yep, we did that. They limped off, But let me tell you, 40 years later, that moment of success still resonated. It was still celebrated. That's still something that's a part of all of their fabric. And I'm thinking maybe 40 years from now, this will mean the same. And kids are learning skills and abilities and the kind of life skills they need in order to move on. So that's what we're really hoping comes through this kind of a program. The city also made an investment in Schroeder Park, Wellness Campus, getting people out, getting kids active. The grass looks better now. We didn't take it on a very good picture. I don't want the Parks Department to think I took a terrible picture.
I'm here, Lori.
Okay, Maggie. It looks great, Maggie. But folks, this is an investment the city helped in making sure that this happened, and this is another just signal to the community, that neighborhood, we need to get you out and moving, and these kids need to be out and becoming more physically fit. I'm going to skip that one, and I'm going to do the last slide, which is also talking about something that I think is going to change the face of our community. This is a map of 1980. Those census tracts show where at least 5% of the population was 75 and older. Our most recent data, this is where the census tracts show 5% of our population is 75 and older. So this is the baby boomers. We're here. The biggest questions and why this is important for Lincoln, of course, is things like transportation and healthcare and social services, housing, housing that's made for older people, which is not building up. It's getting everything built on the same floor. But of course, workforce. The workforce issue in terms of especially long-term care and health care is going to be enormous for our community. So beginning to prepare for that, I think this map tells us the time is now to do that.
And also aging in place, and when we, everyone seems to want to age in place. I think that's natural. It feels very normal, but it also doesn't turn over housing units as well to other people in the community in ways
Absolutely.
that maybe they had in years past.
Absolutely, and it's something that is not maybe as fun as to talk about as some other things, but it is absolutely a compelling issue. Especially I think too for women tend to be the caregivers. What is that going to do to women in the workforce above and beyond just the exodus from the workforce? But how are the women in the sandwich generation going to take care of parents and grandparents? Not that men don't do it too, but the research shows that it's primarily women. So it's something we have to start thinking about. And I know the mayor mentioned it in her State of the Union or State of the City address. So this is just the data. The population of children under 5 will increase by 19% by 2050, and 65 and older will be by 53%. So it's going to be substantial. And I think that is all the maps that we had. We're just glad we had a chance to share them with you, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions?
I have tons of questions.
Well,
but
and
we'll
these two
wait.
are always
Yeah.
available.
Oh, we're always
to us
available.
at any time.
One quick question that I had is on the life expectancy rates, before there were specific numbers, right, like of how long someone would live for, what made the change go from up to 5 years or 5 years lower than average?
Well, you know, in the past, what we tried to do was lump certain areas together and say over here in this area. And we started to think that that really was kind of like tagging a part of the community, when in reality, it's not that simple. And so if we go to the extremes and say this census tract is here and this census tract is here, we can come to those numbers. But we felt like maybe showing it as in more of an aggregate way was maybe more realistic. It might provide people with a better sense of that pink area is in the core. It's all, everything kind of happens in the same area, and instead of drawing attention to specific census tracts. I hope I'm making sense, but we didn't want to just call out census tract blah, blah, blah and say that's the place where the problem is, when in reality it can shift over time.
It's important to note that people with different weights, for example, can go live in any census tract and be successful. It's the weighting, not necessarily the census tract, that actually drives the health outcome.
And yeah, and we don't include everything when we look at longevity, at life expectancy. Not every factor is included, and so it's a tricky thing. But I feel like that map, the way we do it now, really shows that there are those same areas that have the weights placed on them by all of the other issues that we raise.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take a short break. Maggie, could you open the door? We'll come back and we will see if we have directors in the hallway.
And I think that Investigator Parker looked in, and then he locked that door.
Okay.
So